My name is Lena Calloway, 34 years old, and tonight my present life collides head-on with the ghosts I thought I'd buried. The steering wheel is slick beneath my palms, but not from the rain outside, from the sweat of a decision I've rehearsed for years. I'm parked in front of the weathered brick house where I grew up, its porch light casting a pale halo across the empty driveway. Inside, my father is celebrating his 60th birthday surrounded by people who think they know him. People who believe the smiling patriarch story, unaware of the fissures that ran through our family long before I learned to spell my own name. And in my purse is the truth, the $16 million truth, that will crack that portrait wide open. I had built my fortune quietly, invisibly. 10 years of working in silence, amassing wealth, building something entirely my own, all while my father publicly dismissed my every accomplishment. Tonight I'm done being invisible. I imagine his face when the words leave my lips. I imagine my mother's stunned silence. And most of all, I imagine my older brother Ethan, the golden child, watching the carefully maintained family order crumble. This isn't just about money. It's about decades of swallowed hurt, ignored victories, and a constant reminder of where I supposedly fell short. I take the keys from the ignition, step out into the cool night, and the sound of distant laughter from inside cuts through me like glass. Each step toward the door feels heavier but more certain. Tonight everything changes. Waverly Hill wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a performance. Every lawn manicured to perfection, every driveway hosting a car polished like a mirror. My father thrived in this world. A renowned economics professor whose lectures could fill university halls and whose rigid rules could empty a child's confidence in seconds. Our house was his stage. Every book neatly lined on the shelves, every trophy in the glass cabinet, all a testament to intellectual conquest. None of them mine. My mother, once an art teacher whose work had been featured in local galleries, had slowly packed away her brushes. She traded gallery openings for faculty dinners, paint-stained aprons for tailored dresses. Little by little, she gave up pieces of herself to keep pace with my father's career. Then there was Ethan. 2 years older, he absorbed information like breathing, memorizing dates, formulas, and theories with the ease of someone born to impress. My father lit up whenever Ethan entered a room, his voice rising with praise over debate wins and perfect scores. Me. I saw patterns in people, not just numbers. I understood the undercurrent of a conversation, the unspoken motives behind decisions. But in my father's world, that kind of intelligence didn't count. I remember the first time I thought I might win his approval, 4th grade, clutching my first A in math. My heart pounded as I ran into his office. He took the paper, gave a short nod. Better than usual. Then Ethan wandered in with a perfect score and a bonus question solved. My father's face transformed, beaming, energized, brimming with pride. That night at dinner, I sat silent as he dissected Ethan's brilliance for 20 straight minutes. My mother reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a silent apology she never voiced. I learned something that night. In this house, even your best might never be enough. By the time I hit middle school, the script was already written. Ethan brought home perfect grades, got new books, celebratory dinners, and glowing speeches about his future. I brought home a mix of A's and B's, excelling in reading and social studies but stumbling over math and science, and was told to study harder. 6th grade science fair should have been my moment. While Ethan built a cookie-cutter volcano, I dove into something different, testing how various types of music affected plant growth. I tracked every detail meticulously, even building a theory about sound vibrations and cell development that went far beyond a typical 6th grade project. Judges were impressed. I watched them scribble notes, nod, and ask questions. But when awards were announced, Ethan's volcano took first place. Mine got a thin participation ribbon. In the car, I held my ribbon loosely in my lap while Ethan's blue rosette sat proudly on the dashboard. My father's explanation was clinical. Your project was too subjective. Science is about precision, Lena. Your brother's was exact. Yours, creative but flawed. He didn't see it, but in that moment something shifted. I realized I wasn't going to win by playing his game. That summer, something on the kitchen table caught my eye. The financial section of the newspaper. It was like a secret code. At first, the language was foreign, but the patterns intrigued me. I began tracking stocks in a notebook I hid under my mattress, predicting rises and falls just for fun. One morning, I told my father I thought a small tech company he'd mentioned would rise sharply. 3 months later it did by 20%. I brought him the paper proud. He barely glanced at it. Lucky guess, he said before asking Ethan about debate club. That was the last time I sought his validation. After that lucky guess dismissal, I stopped trying to earn my father's approval and started refining my skills in silence. If he couldn't see me, I'd make myself so good the world would have no choice but to notice. High school brought fresh battlegrounds. Chemistry was a nightmare, literature analysis made me restless, but economics? That clicked instantly. I could look at market trends and see invisible threads tying everything together. Shifts in culture, changes in technology, subtle movements in global politics. To me it was a living puzzle. Mr. Dalton, my economics teacher, noticed it before I did. During a class simulation I made a series of trades that outperformed every other student, and most of the adults I'd read about in financial magazines. He called me aside afterward. Lena, you have a market instinct I rarely see in students your age. You think like an analyst. It was the first real academic compliment I'd ever received, and I clung to it like a lifeline. With his encouragement I started a small investment club. 6 of us pooled allowance money and part-time earnings, $2,800 in total. I researched obsessively, analyzing more than just company reports. I watched social trends, studied consumer behavior, and predicted moves others dismissed as unlikely. By the end of the school year, we had grown our fund by nearly a third. The school paper covered it. My father didn't mention it once. Then came junior year's defining moment. A weekend clash between Ethan's state-level debate tournament and my regional economics competition. My parents didn't hesitate. Ethan's is more important for his college application season wrapped the tension in our house so tightly I could feel it in the walls. Ethan's acceptance letters arrived first. Duke, Stanford, Yale. Each one taped proudly to the refrigerator door like trophies. My father would linger in front of them, rereading each letter as if savoring the validation they brought him. I applied to 7 schools, including Wellingford University, my father's alma mater. It was the one I secretly hoped would make him see me differently. I had strong economics grades, competition wins, and a growing portfolio of investments, even if no one knew about it. The letter came on a Tuesday. Thin. Final. Rejected. I shoved it in my desk drawer, determined to deal with it alone. But by dinner my father already knew. Heard you didn't make it into Wellingford, he said casually, carving into his roast. I tried to keep my voice steady. I still have other options. Greyford State has a strong business program and Greyford State accepts anyone with a pulse, he cut in, dismissive as ever. Their program is adequate if mediocrity is your goal. Heat rose in my cheeks. Their finance track is actually ranked. He set down his knife, looking at me over his glasses. Lena, let's be realistic. You'll never be the bright one in this family. Ethan has the academic potential to make something of himself. You should choose something more practical. Social work, maybe teaching. The words landed like physical blows. I excused myself and went upstairs, tears burning hot. Later my mother came in, perching on the edge of my bed. Your father means well. He just wants you to have realistic expectations. I stared at her. No, Mom. He wants me to know I'm a disappointment. She didn't deny it. By morning my decision was made. At breakfast I told my parents I was going to Greyford State for their business program. My father didn't even look up from his coffee. I won't waste money on a school that accepts anyone, he said flatly. If that's your choice you can pay for it yourself. It was meant as a deterrent. Instead it lit a fuse. That summer I took a job as a teller at a small community bank. The branch manager, Mrs. Kenley, had an eye for detail, and apparently for potential. She noticed my habit of flipping through financial magazines on my lunch break and began teaching me the inner workings of the banking system. You have a good mind for this, she told me one slow afternoon. Most people see numbers. You see possibilities. I didn't realize then how much those words would anchor me. Every paycheck went into a carefully calculated split. Tuition savings, living expenses, and a small slice into my growing investment fund. I cut every non-essential expense, took extra shifts, and studied markets after work until my eyes blurred. The night before I left for college, my mother came into my room quietly. She held out an envelope. Inside was $4,800, nearly all of her personal savings. I believe in you, she whispered, hugging me fiercely. Show them what you can do. The next morning, I loaded my beat-up hatchback with boxes, my mother's envelope hidden under the passenger seat, and drove to campus. For the first time, I felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. No one here knew my father's opinion of me. No one knew I was supposed to be the disappointment. It was my clean slate, and I intended to use it. Grayford State's campus sprawled across rolling hills, the mix of old brick buildings and sleek modern glass catching the autumn sun. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Ethan's sister, or Thomas Calloway's daughter. I was just Lena. My roommate, Tessa, was a communications major with turquoise hair and a laugh that could fill a room. She took one look at my stack of finance textbooks and declared, "You're going to own Wall Street someday." "I'm calling it now." I laughed it off, but deep down something in me wanted her to be right. Between classes, I juggled 3 jobs. Mornings in the campus library, nights waitressing at a small Italian restaurant, and weekends as a virtual assistant for an investment blog. Every extra dollar went toward tuition, books, and the investment portfolio I guarded like a secret. That's when I met Professor Marla Hayes. She wasn't like the other finance professors, who recited from textbooks as if reading from sacred scrolls. Hayes had been a Wall Street analyst in the late 90s and early 2000s. She spoke in sharp, unvarnished truths, weaving real-world chaos into the classroom. One afternoon, I challenged one of her assertions about a market trend. I had spotted a contradiction in recent consumer behavior data and backed it up with 3 examples. The room went silent, waiting for her to put me in my place. Instead, she leaned back, studying me. "Most students parrot what I tell them because it's in the book. You actually checked the numbers. That's rare." From that day on, she took me under her wing. She taught me how to see the market like a living organism, shifting, adapting, responding to unseen forces. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. By junior year, I had scraped together $2,000 from campus jobs and side hustles. It wasn't much by Wall Street standards, but to me it was a fortune. Every dollar had been earned while juggling exhaustion and self-doubt, and I wasn't about to waste it on something safe. Professor Hayes had always said, "Fortune follows those who see tomorrow before it arrives." I wanted to test whether I really could. So, against every piece of conventional wisdom, I invested in a small tech startup specializing in social analytics. Most analysts ignored them. Their revenue was negligible, their business model unconventional. But I saw something else. A society glued to screens, desperate for validation and connection. Data about people's emotions online wasn't just noise. It was currency. When I clicked confirm purchase, my hands shook so badly I almost closed the laptop. For weeks afterward, I barely slept, checking the ticker like it was my heartbeat. 8 months later, the company announced a partnership with a major advertising conglomerate. Their valuation exploded overnight. My $2,000 had tripled. $6,000. Enough to pay for tuition, books, and still keep growing my portfolio. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't tell anyone except Tessa, who nearly dropped her slice of cold pizza when I showed her the balance. "Lena, that's insane," she whispered, eyes wide. "You're good at this. Like really good." Her words wrapped around me like armor. For once, I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't lucky. I was right because I saw what others didn't. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Professor Hayes believed in sharpening talent with fire. In my senior year, she recommended me for an internship at a mid-sized investment firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. On my first day, I walked into the glass-paneled lobby in a second-hand blazer and thrifted heels that pinched my toes. The place reeked of expensive cologne and louder than necessary laughter. A room full of men who looked like they'd been born with trust funds and Ivy League diplomas engraved in gold. During orientation, one of them leaned across the table and whispered, "Grayford State, huh? Bold move coming here with that on your resume." His smirk told me exactly what he thought of me. Less than. The firm paired me with Caroline Price, a senior analyst who'd fought her way up during the 80s, back when being the only woman in the room meant fielding both dismissals and propositions daily. She didn't sugarcoat anything. "Finance is still a boys' club," she said during our first coffee run, her tone clipped, her heels clicking like gunfire on marble. "If you want to survive here, you'll have to be twice as sharp for half the recognition. Are you ready for that?" I thought of my father's voice, the sting of every dismissal, the weight of every ignored achievement. I nodded. I've been ready my whole life. Caroline smiled for the first time. Good answer. She taught me more in 3 months than all my textbooks combined. How to read a room in a client meeting, how to pivot when your analysis was questioned, how to stand your ground when a colleague tried to take credit for your work. By the end of the summer, I wasn't just surviving. I was learning to fight and win. Graduation day should have felt triumphant, but for me, it was layered in contradictions. I crossed the stage in my cap and gown, earning honors that no one in my family expected me to achieve. My portfolio, carefully grown from late nights and risky instincts, had reached just over $48,000. It was more money than anyone in my family suspected I possessed. A secret I carried like a shield. My parents sat stiffly in the audience. My father's expression barely shifted as my name was called. To him, graduating with distinction from Grayford State was still less impressive than Ethan's mere enrollment at an Ivy League law school. Later, at the restaurant celebration, he offered me a cold congratulations, then immediately compared my degree to Ethan's trajectory. State school honors aren't quite the same as real academic achievement, he remarked, sipping his wine. Ethan looked down at his plate, guilt flickering in his eyes. But I didn't bite. I had learned the power of silence, of saving my energy for battles that mattered. The truth was, I wasn't entering the world empty-handed. I had Caroline's mentorship, Professor Hayes's recommendation, and a personal fund larger than some young professionals ever touch in their first decade. I'd also secured a position at a respected investment firm in New York City. My father's only response was a dismissive, entry-level paper pushing will give you perspective. Don't set your expectations too high. What he didn't know was that I had already set my expectations, sky high. As I packed up my dorm room that final week, I slipped my small leather notebook, the one with every tracked stock, every lesson learned, into the box marked fragile. It wasn't just paper. It was proof. And soon I promised myself the world would see it too. New York swallowed me whole the first week I arrived. My new apartment was barely a studio in Brooklyn. Cracked paint on the walls, a shower so small I had to press my elbows against the tiles just to rinse my hair, and a view of the alley dumpsters. But it was mine. Each morning, I joined the tide of commuters into Manhattan. The financial district's glass towers rose like monuments to ambition, glittering and indifferent. To most, I was just another junior analyst, anonymous in an oversized blazer and scuffed heels. But inside, I carried the fire of every dismissal, every "you'll never be the bright one." The firm's offices were intimidating, a floor buzzing with Ivy League graduates whose confidence filled every room. They eyed me with curiosity at first, then with thinly veiled condescension when they learned I'd come from Grayford State. State schools breed good administrative assistants, one of them muttered when he thought I couldn't hear. The work was grueling, endless data sets, late nights building pitch decks no client would ever see, and the constant weight of being underestimated. Yet I loved it. The hum of the market reports, the constant churn of numbers, the way information flowed like a river I could almost read ahead of time. 3 months in, our cohort of new analysts was given a challenge. Prepare investment recommendations for an upcoming pitch. Most went with safe options, established corporations, steady returns. I noticed something different. A social media platform, modest at the time, was showing strange but promising shifts in user demographics and engagement. I built my case carefully, laying out the numbers, tying them to cultural shifts I knew others ignored. When I presented, the room went silent. Then the department head cleared his throat. "Miss Calloway, interesting theory. But we prefer recommendations with proven track records. Yours is too speculative." My analysis was dismissed in 10 seconds. That night, I sat in my tiny kitchen with my laptop glowing faintly on the counter, staring at the stock. Then I did what they wouldn't. I invested $10,000 of my own money. For weeks after placing the trade, I lived with a knot in my stomach. Every fluctuation in that stock felt personal, like it was testing not only my analysis but my very right to be here in this city of giants. The firm dismissed my pitch and moved on, but I tracked the company obsessively. I noticed the new partnerships they were forming, the shift in how advertisers were talking about their platform, the sudden spike in user engagement. 6 months later, the announcement came. 3 major corporations had struck deals with the social media company. The stock price didn't just climb. It skyrocketed, leaping nearly 300% in a matter of weeks. My $10,000 investment ballooned into $40,000. Meanwhile, the firm's safe recommendations delivered a modest 8% return. Around the office, the partners congratulated themselves on steady strategy, while I bit my tongue until it bled. No one knew that the youngest, least respected analyst in the building had quietly outperformed them all. I told no one, not Caroline, not Professor Hayes, not even Tessa. The secret was intoxicating. My personal portfolio was proof that I wasn't delusional, that my hybrid approach, numbers fused with cultural intuition, worked. But keeping it hidden also stung. My father's words echoed in the back of my mind, "You'll never be the bright one." I had just beaten a firm full of Ivy League analysts at their own game. And yet, I still wasn't ready to stand up and say it out loud. So I smiled through meetings, nodded when dismissed, and went home each night to run my dual portfolios. One safe and corporate, the other bold and mine. The secret was growing. And with it, so was I. I thought I could keep my dual strategy hidden forever. My safe corporate face during daylight hours and my bold risk-taking portfolio at night. But brilliance has a way of leaking through the cracks. It happened in the most ordinary place, the break room. I was explaining market behavior to a junior colleague, pointing out how shifts in teenage social media habits were signaling the rise of an entirely new advertising model. I wasn't pitching, just talking, almost thinking aloud. Unbeknownst to me, Garrett Townsend, one of the firm's senior partners, stood in the doorway listening. He was known for managing the firm's wealthiest clients, a man with a reputation as sharp as the cut of his suits. "Repeat what you just said," he ordered, startling both me and my colleague. I swallowed hard and outlined my observations again. The metrics, the cultural shift, the potential. My voice wavered at first, but then steadied as I connected the dots no one else had bothered to link. For a moment, Garrett just stared at me. Then slowly a smile tugged at his mouth. "Unconventional," he said. "But interesting. Give me 3 more positions you're watching." I thought it was a passing whim, but within weeks, Garrett began calling me into his office for off-the-record opinions. He'd slide a portfolio across the table and I'd mark patterns, probabilities, and potential risks. 3 times in a row, my predictions landed with uncanny accuracy. Finally, one late afternoon, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Miss Calloway, results speak louder than resumes. I want you on my team." Effective immediately. At 26, I became the youngest analyst promoted to his division. No announcement, no applause, just a quiet shift that changed everything. And for the first time, someone with real power at the firm wasn't dismissing me. He was listening. Joining Garrett Townsend's team was like being pulled from the shadows into the spotlight. Suddenly, I wasn't just another junior analyst drowning in spreadsheets. I was responsible for real portfolios, clients with fortunes I could barely fathom. The hours were brutal. Garrett demanded precision, but he also gave me freedom. "If your way works, prove it," he'd say, sliding a file across his mahogany desk. I did more than prove it. Quarter after quarter, my recommendations outperformed the firm's averages. My hybrid approach, blending traditional financial data with cultural and technological signals, kept hitting bullseyes. Clients began requesting my input specifically. Quietly at first, whispered mentions in boardrooms, a nudge here and there. By the end of my first year under Garrett, I was managing accounts directly, my name appearing on reports that once ignored me. The firm rewarded me with a promotion and a raise. I moved from my crumbling Brooklyn studio into a small but sunlit apartment in Manhattan. The walls were bare, but the view of the skyline each morning reminded me I was no longer on the outside looking in. But what truly thrilled me wasn't the firm's recognition. It was my personal portfolio. Every bonus, every extra cent I funneled into my private strategy. Unlike the firm's cautious positions, my portfolio danced on the edge of trends. Tech adoption cycles, consumer behavior shifts, even social media sentiment. I tracked them all. By my 28th birthday, my personal net worth had quietly passed the $1 million mark. I didn't celebrate with anyone. I didn't tell a soul. Because in my father's world, I was still just our daughter who works with numbers in New York. And I intended to keep it that way. By the time I turned 28, the walls of the firm felt too small. My official portfolio was thriving, my personal one was soaring, and yet, I was still a cog. My ideas were filtered, softened, reshaped to fit the comfort of tradition. Every pitch meeting ended the same way. "Interesting, Miss Calloway. But let's go with something safer." Safe was not what had built me. Late one night, long after the office lights had dimmed, I sat at my desk staring at a balance sheet. My personal fund had grown to nearly $800,000. More than enough to survive failure. Enough to risk freedom. That week, I handed in my resignation. Garrett called me into his office, eyebrows raised. "Are you sure? You're just starting to build something here." "I know," I said, steady despite the tremor in my chest. "But I need to build something that's mine." He studied me for a long moment, then gave a small, rare smile. "Then make them regret underestimating you." And so I did. I launched Calloway Strategies, a boutique investment firm with a tiny office, second-hand furniture, and no clients. I worked 18-hour days, sleeping on the worn leather couch in the corner. For every 10 pitches I gave, 9 ended with polite dismissals. Too young. Too risky. Too unproven. But one yes changed everything. A tech entrepreneur who had just sold his company for $25 million decided to trust me with 5. "The old guard can't see what's next," he told me, shaking my hand. "I want someone who can." Within 12 months, his portfolio had grown by 60%. Word spread like wildfire. And just like that, my little firm wasn't invisible anymore. That single client turned the tide. His success became my proof of concept, the story whispered at cocktail parties and industry events. The young woman who saw tomorrow before anyone else did. Soon more calls came. Entrepreneurs with freshly cashed-out ventures. Mid-level executives tired of stale investment advice. Even a few bold hedge fund managers curious about the girl in the shadows. Calloway Strategies grew from a one-woman show into a buzzing office of 6 analysts, each one handpicked and trained in my unconventional methodology. We didn't just read numbers. We read the world. Social sentiment, consumer trends, early tech adoption patterns, threads the industry dismissed as soft data became the core of our edge. By my 31st birthday, we were managing over $500 million in assets. The industry couldn't ignore me anymore. Journalists started calling. At first, I refused interviews. Then one headline changed everything. "The Oracle of Waverly Street: How Lena Calloway is Rewriting the Rules of Investment." The article painted me as a financial visionary, a disruptor challenging the entrenched power of Wall Street's old guard. A glossy photo accompanied the spread, me in my corner office, Manhattan's skyline blazing through the windows behind me. I bought the magazine, tucked it into my desk drawer, but never mailed it home. Because at every holiday dinner, my father still introduced me as our daughter who does something with stocks in New York. My mother would beam politely. Ethan would nod supportively. No one at that table knew I had already passed a personal net worth of $15 million. The world was starting to call me a visionary. But at home I was still invisible. The invitation arrived in an ivory envelope, neat cursive announcing, "Join us in celebrating Thomas Calloway's 60th birthday." For weeks I debated. I could send polite regrets as I had so many times before, and avoid the circus altogether. But the lie, or perhaps the omission, had gone on long enough. 10 years of swallowing my success, of downplaying every milestone while my father praised Ethan's law practice as though it were divine. This time I wouldn't shrink. The drive from Manhattan to Waverly Hill was only 90 minutes, but it felt like traveling backward through decades. The closer I came, the more I felt the old shame pressing against my chest, the voice whispering that I was still the girl who never measured up. But this time I wasn't arriving in a rented sedan. I drove my own car, a gleaming luxury machine worth more than my parents' mortgage. I could already picture the way it would look parked in their modest driveway. When I stepped out, the night air was crisp, my heels clicking against the pavement. I carried a bottle of vintage champagne under my arm, its price tag another unspoken truth. My mother opened the door. Her face lit up with genuine joy as she pulled me into a hug. "Lena, you look wonderful." Her eyes flicked over my tailored black suit, her gaze catching on the unmistakable quality of the fabric. "And the car." "Mine," I said softly before she could assume it was borrowed. From behind her, my father appeared, checking his watch. "Lena, good of you to come. Most of the guests will be arriving soon." His tone was flat, practiced. As though I were simply another guest at his party, not the daughter who had carried a secret empire into his home. And for the first time I felt the weight of what was about to unravel. Inside nothing had changed. The same furniture, the same framed photos, the same trophy shelf weighed down by Ethan's medals and debate awards. My economics certificate had never made it there, a reminder of my permanent omission. Guests trickled in, coats draped over arms, laughter spilling through the entryway. My father played the perfect host, his booming voice filling the living room as he recounted Ethan's recent courtroom victory as though it were a Supreme Court case. He never once mentioned me. Ethan and his wife, Marissa, arrived soon after. Despite everything, I had never resented him. He was as much a prisoner of our father's approval as I had been of his dismissal. He hugged me warmly, whispering, "The New York life suits you. You look strong." But strength wasn't what I felt. My pulse was wild beneath my calm expression. As drinks were poured, the same old rhythm replayed. My father holding court, Ethan nodding modestly, my mother hovering in the background. When a colleague of my father's politely asked what I did, my father answered before I could open my mouth. "Lena works for some firm in New York. Still dabbling in stocks, isn't that right?" His chuckle, sharp and careless, sliced through me. I smiled tightly. "Something like that." The doorbell rang. My father's old friend, Professor Whitmore, entered with his wife and their son, Daniel. Daniel stopped mid-handshake when he reached me. His eyes widened. "Lena Calloway? From Calloway Strategies." The room fell silent. My father frowned. "You must be mistaken." But Daniel was already pulling out his phone. "No mistake. She was on the cover of Forbes last month. The Oracle of Waverly Street." He held up the image, me standing in front of the New York Stock Exchange. The air shifted instantly. My mother gasped. Ethan blinked in astonishment. And my father's face paled. The secret was out. For a moment the room was frozen. Daniel's phone glowed with my image on the Forbes cover, the bold headline impossible to ignore. My father's colleagues craned their necks, murmurs rippling like an unstoppable tide. My father recovered first, his voice tight. "These business magazines exaggerate. They love to create celebrities out of nothing." Daniel shook his head. "Exaggeration? Hardly. Calloway Strategies delivered the highest client returns in the industry last quarter. Half the hedge fund managers downtown are trying to get on her client list." All eyes shifted to me. My mother's hand rose to her mouth in shock. Ethan leaned forward, astonishment flickering into something like pride. But my father's face burned crimson. "Why would you hide this from your family?" His voice cracked like a whip. My composure wavered, then hardened. 10 years of swallowing truth pressed against my chest. "I didn't hide it," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "You never asked. You were too busy praising Ethan to notice I was building something of my own." Gasps fluttered around the room. My father's jaw tightened. "Ungrateful. Everything I did was to set you both up for success." "No," I shot back, the words sharp and final. "Everything you did was to prove you were right about me being wrong. But here's the truth, Dad. I manage over $1 billion in assets. My personal net worth is $15 million. And all you've ever called it is dabbling in stocks." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Ethan stared at the floor, his shoulders tense. I pushed back my chair, the scrape against the hardwood echoing through the stunned room. "Dinner is ruined. I shouldn't have come." And as I turned toward the door, I realized my father wasn't just losing control of the evening. He was losing the story he'd written about me. I stumbled out the front door, the air sharp and cold against my flushed cheeks. My hands trembled so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. Inside the house, muffled voices clashed. My father's strained defense, my mother's tears, the low murmur of embarrassed guests. Then came a soft knock on my window. Ethan. For a moment I considered ignoring him. But his eyes, tired, earnest, convinced me otherwise. I unlocked the passenger door and he slid in beside me. He whistled low. "Nice car. Much better than my family sedan." I gave a half laugh through tears. "Gas mileage is terrible." We sat in silence, the hum of cicadas filling the night. Then Ethan spoke. "I didn't know, Lena. About the company. About any of it." "Of course you didn't," I said, bitterness seeping through. "No one ever asked." He shook his head. "No, I mean I didn't know how much Dad hurt you. I was too busy being the golden child trying to keep his approval." I turned, startled. "You had everything." His laugh was hollow. "Everything he wanted. Not what I wanted. Do you know what it feels like to wake up every morning and dread the work you do, but do it anyway because disappointing him feels worse? He rubbed his face with both hands. I hate corporate law, Lena. I've hated it since the first day. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The golden child in his gilded cage. The perfect son who had been every bit as trapped as I'd been dismissed. You got away, he whispered. I never did. In that moment I realized, neither of us had truly been free. Till now. The two of us sat in silence for a long time, the house glowing behind us like a stage set. For years we had played our assigned roles, golden son, forgotten daughter. But tonight neither of us wanted the script anymore. Let's go back in, Ethan said finally. His voice was steadier than I'd expected. Running away won't change him. But maybe facing him will. Together we walked through the door. The party had deflated. Most guests had tactfully slipped out, leaving half-empty glasses and a dining table set for a dinner that would never be eaten. My father stood in the living room, his posture rigid but his eyes tired. My mother sat on the sofa, her makeup streaked with tears, her hands folded in her lap like a woman who had weathered one storm too many. I broke the silence first. We need to talk. About everything. About the last 15 years. My father straightened, defensive instinct rising. I don't understand why you would hide your success from us. Were you trying to embarrass me? To make us look foolish in front of my colleagues? I shook my head. No, Dad. I was protecting myself from the reaction you just gave me at dinner. Dismissal. Disbelief. The assumption that anything I achieved must be exaggerated. Ethan stepped forward. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. She's right, Dad. You never asked about her work. You never wanted to see her beyond the box you put her in. And you did the same to me, just in the opposite direction. My father blinked, genuinely startled. What do you mean? Ethan took a long breath. I hate corporate law. I've hated it every day for the past 7 years. But I stayed because disappointing you felt like falling off a cliff. For once, my father had no immediate reply. His silence was louder than his lectures had ever been. And in that pause, the balance of power shifted. The silence stretched, heavy and raw, until my mother spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than I'd ever heard. He did say it, she whispered, staring at her folded hands. The night you were rejected by Wellingford, Lena. He said you'd never be the bright one. And I sat there. I let him. My father turned, shocked. Eleanor. No, she lifted her head, and for the first time I saw defiance in her eyes. For years I let you dictate what mattered. I gave up my art, my studio, my voice, all to support yours. And then I watched you do the same to our children. Ethan was trapped under the weight of your expectations. Lena was crushed under your dismissals. And I said nothing. That silence was my betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I failed you both. I wanted peace more than I wanted to protect you. And that was wrong. My father sagged into his armchair, the certainty that had always surrounded him beginning to crack. I pushed because I wanted you both to succeed, he muttered. I thought if I demanded more, you'd rise higher. I stepped closer, my voice steadier than I felt. No, Dad. You wanted us to succeed in ways that made you proud. But pride doesn't come from forcing someone into your mold. It comes from seeing who they actually are. For the first time in my life, my father didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He just looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Doubt. And in that doubt I saw the first fragile crack of change. For years I'd imagined this moment. The confrontation, the truth laid out like evidence in a trial. And now, with my mother's confession still echoing in the room, I pulled my phone from my purse. Do you want to know what I've built, Dad? My voice didn't shake this time. Do you want to see what you dismissed as dabbling in stocks? I tapped open the Callaway Strategies website, flipping through the pages, glowing press coverage, performance charts, industry awards. Headlines naming me one of the top 40 innovators in finance under 40. My firm's billion-dollar client portfolio. I held the screen toward him. This is mine. Every sleepless night, every risk, every calculation. This is what I built while you were too busy pretending I didn't exist. He stared at the glowing screen, his glasses slipping lower on his nose. For the first time in my life, the certainty in his expression faltered. A crack of something raw flickered there, not pride, not yet. Something closer to regret. I didn't know, he whispered. His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. No, I corrected softly. You didn't ask. Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. And she's not the only one. His gaze didn't leave our fathers. I'm leaving corporate law. I've accepted a teaching position at the university. It's what I've always wanted. And I don't care if it disappoints you. My father blinked as though struck. His world, the rigid order he had enforced for decades, was crumbling in front of him, rebuilt by the very children he had underestimated or controlled. And for once there was no lecture on his lips. Only silence. The silence was suffocating until my mother stood, her hands trembling but her voice steady. This ends tonight, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, from me to Ethan to my father. We cannot keep living inside the lies we've built. My father looked up startled. Eleanor. No, she cut him off firmly. For 30 years I kept quiet. I enabled you, Thomas. I let your definition of success suffocate not only me but our children. I gave up my art, my career, my joy to support yours. And in the process I taught Lena and Ethan that silence was the price of peace. That is my failure and I will no longer carry it forward. Her words cracked something inside me. For the first time she wasn't the quiet figure smoothing over my father's sharp edges. She was a woman reclaiming her voice. We need help, she continued. Therapy. As a couple and as a family. Not to erase what happened but to face it. To learn how to see each other as we really are, not as roles forced on us. Ethan's jaw tightened, then he nodded. I'll do it. My father shifted uncomfortably, his certainty unraveling thread by thread. Therapy? That's unnecessary. It's not optional, my mother said, her voice like iron. Not if you want a relationship with your children. Not if you want a marriage with me. For once he didn't argue. He looked smaller, older, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of decades had finally caught up to him. In that fragile, unfinished silence, something new flickered in the room. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the possibility of it. 6 months later, I found myself sitting in a therapist's office in Boston, the same city where I had once been branded a disappointment. My parents sat across from me, Ethan beside me, the four of us awkwardly learning to untangle years of silence and scars. The sessions were not easy. My father wept once, admitting that his own father had treated him the same way, reducing his worth to grades, titles, and measurable achievements. I became what I hated most, he confessed, his voice rough. For the first time I believed his regret. My mother began painting again. She reopened her studio, even hosting a community exhibition that drew a small but eager crowd. I bought her largest canvas for my office boardroom, a bold swirl of color she titled Renaissance. It felt like all of us, reborn in fragments. Ethan walked away from the corporate law machine and into teaching. The first time I visited his lecture hall, I saw a light in him I hadn't seen since we were children. Alive, free, finally unshackled from being the golden child. As for me, I continued to build Calloway strategies but with a new purpose. I launched a mentorship program for women in finance, offering them the guidance I had once longed for. Watching them grow reminded me that my story wasn't just about numbers. It was about resilience, defiance, and finding worth where none had been given. One evening, after an awards ceremony where I was recognized for innovation in finance, my father pulled me aside. His words were halting but they were real. I am proud of you, Lena. Not for the money. For the courage to be who you are. It wasn't a perfect ending. Families rarely get those. But it was enough. Because for the first time in my life I didn't need his pride to know my worth.